Welcome to Coffee with Kupke, a production of St. Paul Inside the Walls. Here on Coffee with Kupke, we grab a cup of coffee, at least we're claiming this is coffee. We sit with Monsignor Kupke, Raymond Kupke, the pastor of St. Anthony's in Hawthorne, professor at Immaculate Conception Seminary, diocesan archivist. We sit with Monsignor Kupke to delve into the history of Catholicism in the Diocese of Paterson. My name is Father Paul Manning. I am the vicar for Evangelization for the Diocese of Paterson. And here I am with Monsignor Kupke. So grab your cup of coffee and let's jump right in. I'm going to take a sip. Welcome back.
Thank you.
How are you doing with coffee?
Coffee with Kupke is always full.
Yeah, I'm still good. 9th cup today.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there were a few things I wanted to ask you about the polls.
Let me just say before we start, if you read the parish histories of these places, you get a sense of the difficulty with the non-ethnic priests.
Mm.
If you read a history of St. John's in Paterson, the cathedral, they talk about how magnanimous Dean McNulty was in welcoming each of these groups and allowing them to use the Lady Chapel until they could get on their feet and build their own church.
Because that was atypical?
Well, if you read the parish histories of St. Michael's, St. Stephen's in Paterson, St. Anne's, they will say in so many words, that miserable Irish priest forced us to go into that ratty chapel because we didn't give enough money in the collection.
Oh, so we couldn't go in the big church.
We couldn't go into the big church, and we was forced until finally we just said we've had enough of this, and we build our own church.
Okay.
So it's a much different take of the same.
Yeah. Now, how many parish histories have you read?
Oh, God.
A lot.
Yeah.
How many have you written?
One.
Which parish?
Pius and Montville.
Okay. Yeah. You didn't write St. Peter's for the... No. Okay. So I have a name, Father Chlebowski?
Chlebowski, yes.
Yeah, so what's his deal?
He's really the first resident pastor for St. Joseph's in Passaic, and St. Joseph's would be the original parish with the Polish community in Passaic and really in the diocese. So.
And he seems to have lasted a long time?
Yes, he did, and built a school, opened a school, built the current church.
Wow. How about...
the old church is still standing. Most people don't realize it, but when you drive down to Passaic, you can see the original church there to the right of the current one. Okay.
And that's used for what now?
A good question. I think they rent it out as a
hall or something?
A hall, yeah.
Now, St. Stephen's, was that a Polish parish originally?
St. Stephen's in Paterson, yes.
Yeah. So there were 5 pastors in 9 years, I read.
Yeah.
What was going on there?
Again, the stability of who's coming over,
Okay.
You take a chance on somebody, or the other thing is that you have so few of them that you're moving them to bigger grounds very quickly.
Yes.
The people like Chlebowski and Shanchi, who were stable, the bishops burned incense in front of them because they provided stability. And you can see it in the way those parishes developed. Their stability in the parish gave the parish
a firm foundation. Yeah. So now we want to move to your folks,
the Slovaks.
Yeah. So just how much Slovak do you have in you?
Half.
Oh, wow.
Quarter. My mother's parents.
Okay. And did you know them?
Yes.
Yeah. So were they were immigrants?
They were immigrants.
These are your grandparents.
These are my grandparents.
And
it's interesting. from a purely family perspective, our understanding of their daughters, my mother and my aunts, was that they met in the Slovak community on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, on this side of the ocean.
Yes.
So when my aunt and uncle and I finally get to Slovakia for the first time and meet dozens of relatives that we barely knew existed, because apparently my grandfather was the only one who ever left this town.
Oh.
Everybody else is still there.
Wow.
But, we told them this, understanding, and they looked at us and said, no, that's not what happened. They met over here in the village, and then she immigrated, and he chased her over there.
Oh.
And I can remember my aunt, this is her parents that they're talking about. And she's just looking like, where'd that come from?
Wow. So it was about your grandfather wooing your grandmother.
Yeah.
Now, do you remember them speaking Slovak or?
Yes, as kids, when they didn't want us to understand what was going on, they spoke Slovak.
And your mother?
Not really.
Probably understood.
No. My one aunt with whom my grandfather lived in his old age, she could handle it.
Yeah.
Like when we went over to Slovakia, I was shocked that all of a sudden this all came back to her and she was suddenly speaking.
Wow.
Something I hadn't heard her say in years.
So forgive my ignorance of geography and history, but situate Slovakia for us at this point, and at some point it's going to become Czechoslovakia.
Slovakia is the eastern half of what between World War I and World War II was Czechoslovakia.
Okay.
So you have three provinces of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. You have Bohemia, where Prague is, Moravia in the middle, and then Slovakia all the way to the east. So they kind of get melded into a country, a hybrid country.
Yes.
Kind of the upscale urban Bohemians.
Yes.
And the rural country Slovaks.
Okay.
And they get thrown together. And finally, once the communism falls and the wall falls and everything, then they amicably split.
Yeah. Now, did your grandparents find a Slovak parish?
On the Lower East Side of Manhattan,
Okay.
St. Cyril and Methodius in Manhattan, which is still there and still functioning, and still has Slovak Mass because there have been new immigrants, of course, since the.
Now, why is it that we have two Cyril and Methodiuses in our diocese?
Because we have two Slovak parishes, one in Clifton and one in Boonton. We actually have four that claim to be Slovak parishes.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me there were two more Cyril and Methodiuses that I didn't know about. Okay.
No, ultimately, it's interesting. The Italians and the Poles don't move into Morris County, but the Slovaks do.
Okay.
So the Slovaks have the only two ethnic parishes in Morris County, St. Cyril and Methodius in Boonton and Sacred Heart in Rockaway. And then in the city, St. Mary's in Passaic and St. Cyril and Methodius in Clifton.
Yes. Okay. So it seems like St. Mary's in Passaic was one of the first.
St. Mary's in Passaic is the first, and Endless Trouble.
Oh, because?
This is a place, if you thought 5 pastors in 9 years was bad, they claim 5 pastors in the first 5 years.
Wow.
And again, one of them was arrested for practicing medicine without a license. One shot one of his parishioners. One ran off to the California Gold Rush. You can't make this stuff up, and you sit back and you think about the bishop at the time saying, what do I do next? Where do I go?
Well, so it's funny because, in thinking about this chapter and realizing we would wrap it up at some point, I went to the footnotes again, and that's where I found out about Belgia, practicing medicine, Father Belgia.
Yeah.
And then Father I can't read my own writing, but it's a big, long name, who was the one who threatened someone with a revolver.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And was charging $5 for baptismal stipends?
which in that time was a
Would have
lot of
been
money.
outrageous. Wow. Yeah. So he got in trouble.
He got in trouble. So eventually, they find somebody, O'Connor finds somebody who apparently was kind of miserable, grumpy, difficult, but he was stable.
Was this Haytinger?
Yeah. So Haytinger remains... Emery Haytinger. And it's based on his personality more than anything else that there is then a split in St. Mary's, and a Slovak National Catholic Church emerges, which then ultimately will join the PNCC.
Okay, wow. So similar issues over land and ownership and...
But almost more because of the... Haytinger's routine would be to find in Europe a priest to be his assistant. The best ones were the ones that could not speak English, because then Haytinger could keep them under his control.
Yes.
So he finds one, and the guy is much too popular.
Oh, boy.
And there, at the same time, in Europe itself, particularly in Slovakia, there is all kinds of strife between the Hungarian government, which runs Slovakia at the time, and the Slovaks themselves.
Okay.
So at this point, we're talking about the first decade of the 20th century. You could not preach in Slovakia.
Wow.
You could not teach in Slovak in the school. You had to use Hungarian.
Oh, boy.
So there is a dichotomy between the clergy that go along with this,
yes,
and are looked as, they're called them Magyarones, Hungarianizers.
Yeah.
Versus the simple clergy who are like practicing in Slovak. So he brings over one of these, and very quickly this guy who cannot speak English is used by a faction of the parish that want to get Haytinger out.
Oh, boy.
And so a whole split,
It's
which
funny.
continues today. The church is still there.
It's funny, though, I always felt, and I said this to seminarians when I was vocation director, that one of the jobs of the parochial vicar is to make the pastor look good. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yes, but sometimes
they accuse Haytinger of appropriating the title von Haytinger, kind of uppity. Yeah.
Well,
there was a whole raft of stuff going on, but it plays out in on this side of the ocean.
Yeah.
The tensions that are going on over in the Eastern Europe at the time.
Yeah. You say Haytinger spoke 6 languages.
Yeah. It's a part of the world where everybody speaks several languages.
That's true in some, like,
if you can speak Slovak, you could probably also make yourself understood in Czech and Polish, and So a priest like that, he can be as grumpy as he wants to be. If he actually can function and cover all these bases.
Yeah.
And Haytinger also gets involved in prompting Cyril, Methodius, and Boughton and Sacred Heart and Rockaway as well.
You and I have talked about this, but and this is way off track, but my sense is that priests get a little more curmudgeonly and grumpy the older we get, because the more you've been in it, the more you've had to deal with good stuff and bad stuff, and stuff that gets harder to tolerate. Yeah. So my point.
You and I have, towering respect for Kevin Flanagan.
Yeah.
But we both remember what he was like on Ash Wednesday.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So, Yeah, certain things he wouldn't put up with. He had just had enough.
Yeah.
Like the A&P Catholics got to him a little bit.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
Okay, so I hesitate to wade into this next section, and I'm going to ask you to simplify this for us. But you have a section on the Eastern rites, right? So we have are the Poles and the Slovaks, are they Eastern Rite? Of them are.
If you go to the easternmost part of Slovakia today, there are people in those villages who have been in 3 countries in their lifetime without having ever moved.
Yes.
Because after World War II, the Soviet Union detached the 2 easternmost counties of Czechoslovakia and annexed them to the Ukraine.
Oh.
So on top of everything else, it's a very complex area. But yeah, we're talking about the Carpathian Mountains.
Okay.
At the farthest eastern borders of Slovakia, between Slovakia and Ukraine.
You can tell he sees the map in his head, can't you?
Yeah.
Like the geographical map.
So this is
because I'm not seeing it.
This is the area that the Ruthenians come from. So this would be St. Michael's Cathedral in Passaic, Holy Wisdom in Sakasana.
Right.
All right. So they come from this part of the world.
So these are Catholics
of the Byzantine Rite.
Right, who are celebrating the liturgy in their own language with their own traditions, but still are loyal to the Pope.
Right.
But
in this country, they get separated from the Ukrainian Byzantines, basically because the Ukrainians live on the north side of the Carpathian Mountains. The Ruthenians live on the south side, and they are different from the Ukrainians because the Ruthenians are one of a number of groups in Europe that have never been independent.
Okay.
They're kind of like the Laplanders and the Tyrolese and the Basques. They have never actually had their own country.
Right.
But they're a separate ethnic group.
Yeah.
And they are different than their Byzantine brothers on the other side of the mountains, who are very, very much nationalistic, the Ukrainians.
Yes.
And you see that today. So when they come over to this country, Rome divides them in this country because
from the Ukrainians.
From the Ukrainians.
Wow. And so suddenly they have their own identity? Or
they have their own identity, right.
And so they kind of thrive, yes?
Pardon?
Do they thrive, the Ruthenians?
They do. And you can see the difference between the two groups even today, even though they have the same liturgy. It's a different language, but the Ruthenians are much more American, in a word, because they don't have the nationalistic Ukrainian thing going on. So they're not as concerned about preserving Ukrainian language and all of that, like they will just, even now they have begun to refer to themselves as the American Byzantine Church.
Oh, interesting. Wow. So
the only, in Catholicism, there are 15 Eastern churches that are semi-independent, self-governing.
Yes.
Of the 15, 14 of them are either in the Middle East or Eastern Europe.
Yes.
And then there's the Archbishop of Pittsburgh.
Yes, the
Ruthenian. Who is a sui juris, head of a church.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the Ruthenians.
So I was aware of is it the cathedral in Passaic?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
St. Michael's.
Right. And then saw in your book that there is Holy Wisdom in Sakasana. In our part of I come from there, we would say it's Flanders, but
they go back and forth.
Yeah. But and it's kind of tucked away, that church. I don't know that I ever saw it.
Yeah.
And it's right near where I grew up. So I'm going to take a ride out there and take a look at it.
Well, oddly enough, for your purposes, there is a third one right around the corner from where you once lived.
Ruthenian?
Yes. St. Peter and Paul in Rockaway.
Yes. So I knew actually the pastor there.
Right.
Yeah.
So in the 1920s, there's a big split in the American Byzantine community
Okay.
over the issues of married priesthood and what they consider to be the imposition of Western practice on their right.
Yes.
Coupled with that, there is an intense proselytization movement from the Russian Orthodox.
I have that note there.
So if you stand in Passaic, right down the street from St. Michael's Byzantine Catholic Cathedral is St. Peter and Paul Russian Orthodox Cathedral, which was once a Catholic parish.
Okay, so the same thing happened in Rockaway?
In Rockaway, St. Peter and Paul.
Became affiliated with the Orthodox.
Yes, but they did not go with the Russians. They went and became independent. So the American Carpatho-Russian Orthodox Greek Catholic Church is much like the Polish National Catholic Church. It's a schismatic group that emerges on this side of the ocean because of the perceived oppression by the Romans.
Yes, so are we feeling a little bit guilty about Jesus' prayer that they all may be one?
Yeah.
We're not doing so
We
well.
have some work to do at home.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. So
I remember, there are funny sides of this because many of these took place 75, 80 years ago. So, much of the sting of them has disappeared. I remember when John Paul II was elected, one of the Polish national priests said to me, he said, were we that big a problem for you that you had to go and do this, select the Polish Pope?
Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
So, and even in Passaic, Passaic, the religious history of the city of Passaic could be on Netflix. It could be a series all by itself.
That might be
the ins,
our next project.
The ins and outs.
Yes.
We haven't even covered the Italian ethnic independent church in Passaic.
Oh no,
St. Anthony's.
But we're not going to go there now because we've run out of time.
But today, many of these groups, like they switch back and forth depending on who they marry. And, it's a interesting hodgepodge. Before we depart, I would just say, I don't know if you went, but this past spring or summer, I guess, when Father Chris Tisco was ordained, if you went to his first Mass at Holy Rosary in Passaic, you saw the explosion of ethnic customs at his first Mass.
Yeah, I wasn't
that
there.
That would give you a hint of what this was like, 80, 90 years ago.
Okay. Let's leave it there. I want all of you who are listening or watching to make sure that you keep an eye out or an ear out for the next episode of Coffee with Kupke. In order to stay on top of new releases, make sure you follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you are on YouTube, please do drop a like and hit the bell for notifications. While you're at it, make sure to check out the other shows produced by the diocese. Those shows are Beyond the Beacon, hosted by Bishop Kevin Sweeney and Jay Agnish, our Director of Communications, and the Paul Street Journal, hosted by Brian Hansberger and Freddie Garcia. I want to give a special thanks to Joe Ginexi, our sound and visual engineer, Caitlin Ferrari, who's involved in pre- and post-production, and Freddie Garcia, who's helping out with this podcast in addition to doing his own. With all that said, I just want to thank you for joining us in Coffee with Kupke. Keep making Catholic history in the Diocese of Paterson.